And YouTubers, welcome back. Today we're talking about solid roller cams and their use for the street. What I've learned, I don't really drive mine too much, but I have had this guy out a lot at times. There is some maintenance stuff that you got to worry about this that is more than a hydraulic roller or anything with a hydraulic base. And today we're going to talk about that. And this is just my experience with solid roller cams. I have had 3 motors that have had solid roller cams in them. So this is going to be my experience with them. But there's one very important thing to note. I am not an expert, but I'll go over what I do and what has worked for me. So with that said, let's get to the video. Now, the first thing to take into consideration if you want to do a solid roller cam on your street application, usually the people who are doing this, they want to spin the motor higher, have a little more reliability when you get past 6,500 RPM, especially on Gen 1 and Gen 2 motors like these old guys right here, because the cam cores are not as big and it's a little more beating up on the valve train, a little more taxing on it than it is with the newer stuff like the LS motors. So if you are wanting to spin it up more and you do not mind the extra bit of maintenance that it takes to maintain a solid roller cam, then you probably want to watch this video. If you don't, you probably don't want to watch it, but if you want to learn, go ahead, learn. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but this is what I've learned in between 3 motors that I've drove a lot on the street with a solid roller cam. If you're prone to having seizures, look away for a second. I bought this from Harbor Freight and I was like, man, this is gonna be awesome. I'll get more light on the engine bay, be able to see everything. And when I first turned it on, I got this. Whew. I mean, you can't see it when you're looking at it with your eyes, but the camera picks it up. But if you just click it another time, there you go. And make sure you leave it plugged in so that way, if you don't, after a while, it'll go on dim, it'll start doing this. But if you leave it plugged in, you can always put it on high and you get around that whole issue right there. Now, the nice thing about solid roller cams, depending on your core, if you have one of those typical street inexpensive solid roller cams that use a cast core, you're limited to how much pressure you can run. You can run a little more than you can with a hydraulic roller. And the reason why you can't run that much pressure with a hydraulic roller is because it will collapse the lifter. And not only that, but once you get way up in the RPM range and it's really moving up and down, that little lifter becomes like a sponge. They do have short travel ones, which are up in the price compared to your regular hydraulic roller lifters. But once you get up in that high RPM range, they start to become like a little sponge and you don't have the same control way up top in your power band. And that's the good thing about solid rollers are you can run way more spring pressure, be way more aggressive in the lopes and get a little more power up in your top range of the RPM, a little more valve control that you can't really do with a standard hydraulic roller cam. But this one right here, you notice that way down here, the distributor gear is a pressed on iron gear. And now what that does, it allows you to not run a very soft brass gear, which most racers run because they don't put that many miles on it. They wear it real quick. So this one, you can run a whatever run-of-the-mill small block Chevy Gen 1, Gen 2 distributor gear, and this guy will just last forever. And that is one thing that I found with these guys. If you go with the 3-piece core, they are more expensive, and you don't want to worry about pulling that gear out on the distributor, this is definitely the way to go. Now on this guy over here, whenever it gets put together, I am not going to run a 3-piece because I'm going with Urson. The cam builder makes really good cams. We all know the cam that he built for this guy right here works extremely well for what it is. These, home ported heads. It revs all the way to 7,000, no problem. So I'm very happy with the stuff that he did. Has an excellent power band, lots of torque. So I'm gonna have the same cam builder make me a cam from Urson, not with comp. But the problem is they don't have any cores for the 3-piece right now. And they're not sure when they're going to get them in. I'm not sure if that has stuff to do with what's going on in our times of Corona or whatever. But I've talked to a lot of guys, and they're saying if you get a everywhere gear from Lanati or the melanized gears, they do last a long time, but I'm still going to check mine whenever it goes in. So we're going to figure out exactly how a billet core, one-piece billet core, and the everywhere gears or the melanized gears are going to work out in this guy right here. So that's been something new that I haven't done yet. But as far as that, there's so many different cam cores, so take into consideration if you want to be pulling out distributor gears, you know, checking them, run the correct gear for your cam. And they also have a composite gear, but you do not want to run a composite gear on a high volume oil pump, else you might crack that gear. When I say composite, it's plastic. I know somebody probably saw this cam like, man, you didn't like store that correctly, it's got rust on it. Well, that is true, because if you look right here, look at this guy right here. The distributor pin that holds the gear on came out halfway, and it kept on rubbing on this one tooth right here. And when I talked to Comp and asked them how much it was going to be just to replace this gear and send it in, they were like, it costs more than a new cam. So I was like, yeah, well, whatever. I guess this thing's junk now. So I don't really worry about it. I just kind of keep it around for show and tell. All right, so what we have here is a solid lifter. Now, when you purchase your lifters, depending on your motor, you might have to get a different lifter. If you're using a Gen 1 style block or non-OE roller block, you can get away with not running a 300 thousandths taller lifter. Because the OE roller blocks, you have to run a 300 thousandths taller lifter, and they are generally more expensive, and you can't get those guys into your block if you put the heads on first. You have to put the lifters in first, unlike the Gen 1s, which you can just pull the lifters in and out whenever you want, but that's by taking the intake off, which is more convenient. But the reason why is because they made the decks higher where the lifters go in, where the spider assembly goes on there that holds all those guys in there, so you have to get taller lifters for that. And another thing you want to worry about, see right here, this little oiling port right here? Because the majority of the time, even with these guys, these have, you know, priority oiling, so it goes down to needle bearings right here, and it keeps this guy living longer. But you got to consider this too, is they do make ones that don't really have that, and they rely on splash for your oiling. So if you run a solid roller lifter that does not have the correct provisions for oiling, you are going to burn that thing up so fast. Now, different from your OE roller motors, these guys are going to have link bars. If you're running a retrofit hydraulic roller on a Gen 1 motor, they're going to come with link bars. You're probably familiar with that. But if you're on a OE roller motor and you have never seen a link bar lifter, all of these guys are going to have link bars. I'll have one lifter out to show you guys. I'm definitely not taking my intake off down there to show you guys these lifters. But I'll have one right there and one right there. And that's how these link bars work. And that's why you need on the Gen 2 blocks or OE roller blocks, you need to have a 300 thousandths taller lifter, is so that this link bar won't sit there and hit on the top of the deck where your lifters go in. That just would not be too good. All right, so now we get into maintenance. And this is going to be probably a lot of you guys will be like, screw that. I'm not going to do that. And there's a couple of things I did to this that makes my maintenance even more than what your typical solid roller street motor would be. So kind of bear with me on this. You know, I'll explain what I have and why I did what I did to my motor, but it might not be what you want to do to your motor. But it was the best decision that I thought, and so did the cam builder, to go when we're doing this setup right here. So let's go ahead and look at this real quick. All right, let me rephrase what I just said. This wasn't really the parts that he recommended. This was the parts that I had, and when I told him what I was doing when he was building the cam, he thought that it would work for what I was trying to do. Now, they make shaft mount rockers for these guys, and they make only one stud girdle for this that I know of, but I could never get in contact with the company. I didn't go with a shaft mount setup on a home ported head that had a lot of miles on it, because I just didn't think that it was worth the money. And when he told me, the cam builder told me that he thought this would probably work as long as you set it up the following way. And you can see right now, all this is loose. This is part of my maintenance ritual every now and then. If it sits for a while, I will just loosen up all these guys, and that way I don't have any pressure all the way down the spring when you're on top of a lope on this guy, which can wear out these springs pretty quickly when you have them set as close to coil bind as I have. So let's talk about that real quick. What we went with, well, what I already had was a 7/16 stud. It's larger than the stock one, so it gives you less flex going this way and that way when this guy is traveling up and down on the cam, because these guys will flex. There's a lot of pressure, especially when you're way up in RPM. All this stuff does not really stand still. It moves a little bit. Used a nice Comp Cans Pro Magnum rocker, very rigid rocker. I love these guys. They work great. I've never had any issues with these. And I'm also using, what he highly recommended, which I did not have, I had to get him regardless, was a 105 wall push rod. So basically what I'm saying is the more rigidity you can put in your valve train to control this guy right here, the more success you're going to have at upper RPM range and not tearing stuff up and just making a better power band in general. So these guys right here, so when you set a spring up really close to coil bind, like when you put your close pressure closer like this, it gives that spring less chance to wiggle around and do movement like that is going to cause instability in your drivetrain. And these springs do not, for a solid cam, do not have a whole bunch of spring pressure. Open is 480 and close, I do not remember. I only remember the open when we put them on the tester, or around 480. But now that it's been around for a while, I guarantee it's probably around 470 or maybe just a slight bit less. But it has worked great. And I'm not saying that this is the best setup and you should go with this setup, but this setup does work. And a lot of guys said I had it too close to coil bind, but the builder said, don't worry about what they say because I've done this a lot, and he was correct. So let me show you guys how close this is. It's gonna freak some of you guys out, but it works. All right, so down here I have just a breaker bar that allows me to turn the motor over, and we're just going to set these guys right here. And I use the EOIC method, which is exhaust opening, intake closing. So let's go through it, and we're right at the exhaust opening. So right here is your exhaust. That is right on your exhaust. So we're going to let that open, and as it goes down, Alright, so as it's opening, you can see this one right now is at the bottom of the lobe on the cam. So we're going to set the intake. And depending on your cam card, you have numbers. I don't go completely by the cam card. These are the ones that I use. On my intake, you can go closer. So on the intake, I go 15, and the exhaust, I go 18. So we're going to do the intake first. And I have, like I said, I got all these loose earlier, so let's go ahead, 15, so let's go ahead and put that guy in there. As I was turning my breaker bar over, the motor was actually pushing it back. I was on a compression stroke, so it was kind of hard. I wasn't turning over as much as it was. You don't want this to go all the way down. You want it to go down kind of halfway, then you know you're right on the bottom of the lobe on the intake side. So I'm going to loosen this guy up. And there's a poly nut in there too. So a little lock. We're going to have to loosen that up also. All right, so now it's loose. We're going to take this down right there. And I see a lot of guys say there's a certain way when I do this. If it goes in and stops, trust me, you're good. You're not going to get that much horsepower or that much, any bit difference you can feel in your butt at all. Maybe 1 horsepower, which won't make a difference anywhere. But this is usually what I do. It's kind of a fill method. You see this right here? And it's just finger tight. Keep that finger tight. So now I'm going to adjust the poly lock right here. I'm going to tighten it down. Use an open end wrench right here. Take that poly lock and we're going to tighten her down. And I got the wrong size. Of course I would. Why wouldn't I have the right size? There we go. All right, so that's on there. We're gonna check it again. And you can see, depending on how much use you have in these guys, those threads will get kind of loose. And as I tightened it up, you see that got a little bit looser when I pushed it in, which is fine. You want it that way. So we're gonna make sure that's nice and tight. Then we're gonna take this guy right here, and then we're just gonna give it a cinch, like that. And that locks that guy in there. And you can see, I believe in go or no go. And now that guy is set. So we're now gonna move on to the exhaust side. Rotate it over. It's hard to turn over because some of those aren't even like opening a valve to relieve the pressure, so that's why it's a little harder right now. Okay, as that goes up, we're going to let the intake go all the way down. And you guys, well, I'll give you a little peep at how close this guy is to coil bind. Right there, we're all the way open. So you can see how close this is to coil bind. When coil bind is, it means that spring will not open up anymore. And if you have coil bind on your rocker as it's coming up, you're going to tear shit up. But you can see, oh, we got some space in there. So not much, but we got it. All right, so we're not where we need this guy to be to make sure we're on the bottom of the lope on the exhaust side. Remember, it's exhaust opening, intake closing. So here we go. Keep on going. All right, you see it starting to come up right there. Now we can set the exhaust. All right, so we're gonna do the exact same thing. We're gonna loosen up the poly lock nut. All right, we're gonna use the larger one because usually the exhaust is larger because the piston's coming up and it's trying to hit the exhaust. So we'll get that in there, finger tight, and that feels pretty good to me. Grab our opening wrench. And we're going to tighten down that poly lock nut. Oops, gotta move it, make sure it's still good. See, I moved it. You gotta be careful. I moved the wrench, which made it too tight. So let's see how that feels again. All right, so as I tighten it up, it should get looser. Usually. Not all the time, though. We're going to check it again. See, I got a little loose when I tightened it up. And then we're going to cinch it. And that should put it right where it needs to be. See, it's kind of a feel thing. You have to learn to feel. And that's it. Cylinder number 1 is now set, and you repeat that process through every other one. And then you're done. All right, well, that's pretty much it. Hopefully that helps you guys if you are thinking about going to a solid roller cam for your Gen 1 or Gen 2 on the street. Hopefully that either gives you the information to say I don't want to do it, or that gives you information that says I do want to do it. And with that said, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and that like button. And until next time, peace.